everybody. Welcome to the bonus content of Workforce. In this segment, I am talking to Christian Hunt, and I'm asking him to explain how you would know if your manager is jealous of you. Let's have a listen to what he has to say.
It's interesting. So in the Inclusion Initiative, I always talk about outside opportunities with people because I think because we're a research unit, the way it's structured, there's a career cap. So either you go and become an assistant professor in the LSE or somewhere else, or you go and kind of go into corporate companies. And somebody reminded me kind of about 6 months ago that actually maybe I don't want to progress. Maybe I'm really like happy doing what I'm doing, and this for me is the utopia. So I don't want to be kind of like being cannonballs like across different positions. And I like the idea of having open career conversations with people about that. So some people get to stay still for a while if they feel that they're learning and they feel that they're growing. And when they stagnate, they get to move, and that you help them move with your network by introducing them to people in organizations external to yourself.
And it's interesting as well because it makes it much more attractive. If you had an honest conversation with people when they joined and said, look, we're going to support you and we will recognize there may come a time when the best thing for you is for you to go somewhere else. And we're going to support you in that. And you can have an honest conversation with us. Then you don't get this really strange dynamic of resignations becoming a big issue. And you have this strange sort of, well, I can't possibly go and have a conversation until I've nailed down another job and made sure that I've got that, I have to have the offer letter, and then I can go and resign when I've got the offer. It's all a bit cloak and dagger. And actually, I think it would be much better to have a conversation saying, look, I will stick around for as long as I think it makes sense for me. And then the organization can also say to people, look, we'd love to keep you on, but actually we think you're best. It just makes for a much more honest set of conversations rather than this sudden, the big reveal is I'm resigning and everybody goes, oh. It shouldn't come as a surprise, right? These dialogues should be happening on an ongoing basis, both ways. And companies can, if we open this dialogue up a little bit, recognizing there are legal challenges with some of this, but having an honest conversation with employees and saying, actually, maybe we can help you to find something. So you're not throwing people out on the street. And then that'll help if you need to make people redundant because you've had a much more honest conversation. So I think we're moving in that direction, but I would love it if people started to feel like, the way you do. But I guess that the problem is it's humans talking to humans. And so if the manager and the senior people aren't of that mindset and haven't grown up with that mindset, haven't experienced it themselves, then it may be very difficult for them to make that adjustment that that's the right thing to do because, sticking around, not doing that has served them quite well.
It always reminds me, so one of my colleagues when I started the Inclusion Initiative, I hired a woman called Paris Will, and she really wanted to go into consultancy, and she was always very open about it, and we had a number of discussions about it, and eventually a role came along that she wanted, and she left. But during the time she was in the Inclusion Initiative, she was an amazing employee, and if I could hire her 10 more times in different, in different human beings, I would do that. And I guess it's this old kind of idea that if you're hiring somebody, they have to be with you forever and ever and ever. And the new idea about thinking about actually this is just one point in the person's career. They're going to come, and actually it can be a good thing if they grow enough because they have added so much value that they need to leave. It's a sad moment, but ultimately for that individual, it's the best thing.
But we recognize that, companies go through different phases. And so what you might need for a company that's a startup, it'll be very different for a later phase. And so we intuitively, we buy properties that match or rent properties, probably in most cases now, that match what we need at that time. And the size of property, the location to match our current needs. And so it would be very weird if employment was somehow, we buy cars or rent cars or whatever, used vehicles that match our needs. So I don't know why employment's any different. I would look at that and just say, look, there's a certain type of job that to start with, I might want a career where I'm going to get a lot of training because I don't know very much and I want to do. And then later on, maybe I want something that allows me to specialize deeply in something. Maybe I'm someone that never specializes and I like flitting, between things, what somebody might view as flighty. I mean, for me, I've always wanted to move on and do something else because I have a very low attention span and that just suits me and I want to try something different. And so, horses for courses. And so I just look at this and think we should be thinking in those same terms. I think it's really sad that we have this, all of this for me comes back to the same thing, which is like, how can we make things more human? And so if we can recognize that humans are different, have different needs and desires, we shouldn't be promoting the same career path for every person. And I love your comment about, the up or out things. Unless you are aspiring to have your boss's job, there's something wrong with you. Well, nonsense. Yep. If I found the best thing ever, it's my vocation. Why on earth would I shift from that? And equally, if what I'm doing is hideous, why should I have to stick around just to serve time? We should have much more fluidity in these things. And I think that's much more human and much more honest.
So I'll give you I have two examples of when corporate Stockholm Syndrome arrives, and I want to get your reaction to it. So I think the first is manager driven, where a person has a really good relationship with their manager, but they ultimately want to do something else. So maybe it's go beyond them, do something that's quite different. But because of the loyalty to the manager, they want to stay. And actually, I think that can be quite rational. Twice in my career, I've wanted to do something different to people who were close managers to me, and they have freaked out when I wanted to do something different. I mean, really had these kind of huge emotional reactions. But I think some of it can be driven as well by the person, and I see this a lot in finance, where you might be managed, for example, by a VP, and that VP is really happy to nurture your career until you are just about to become a VP, and there's something psychological about you passing them out that causes you to stop. And I think this really affects underrepresented talents, so women, Black individuals. I know Black women in particular working in corporate companies where things are okay until they're just about to make that leap. So that relationship with the manager, I think it brings both emotions and maybe a distorted loyalty that people need to be able to shake off.
Yeah, totally. And it's if you look at all these things, what's driving all these is understandable human emotions. When we see these things playing out, it's often raised to go, those are all bad people. But ultimately, you can see we're all on some level jealous, right? It's a natural phenomenon. And so you might start out as a well-intentioned manager going, I'm going to further all these people's careers. And you go, hold on a minute. The natural instinct kicks in. They're a bit of a threat now. Oh, they've grown a bit. Whoa, this is, I don't like this at all. And so we can see that happening. But I think that's a function of the structures that are put in place. Organizations that make a big song and dance about promotions and levels, and banking is where I come from. It's you sort of, let's throw in grandiose titles as early as possible. So you'll get vice presidents, and it sounds, when you read it in the press, so and so is a vice president at Bank X. That sounds like a really these are people that are they're not junior people, but they're sort of the mid level, but they're nowhere near what that title suggests. And it's hilarious because there are no presidents. They're just they've just thrown that title into the middle of the thing. Or you get employers that throw in the word executive at a moment's notice. So what used to be director, we'll call you executive director, so that we can make the director title, we can juniorize it. And then we have managing director, and maybe we'll have some sort of more senior. We throw all these baubles at people. And then, and it's great when people are moving up and doing what the system expects and wants them to do. But the moment that gets challenged, or the moment somebody overtakes you in the race, it starts to become a whole other thing. But I think it all comes down to, humans will react the way that humans react. And we have set up structures. And this is what I'm really bothered by, lots of legacy structures that, was common sense that we would have this sort of, it's causing problems, and job titles and offices and all these sorts of things, I think, are not helpful for exactly the reasons you outlined. And we love them when they work well for us. We absolutely hate them when we don't. And that means people get excluded. And so I'm completely with you. I think it's sort of, you sit there and you're up against a big system, and that plays into this Stockholm syndrome. It's like, I've started to play a game, and I'm in this particular game, and I better see this game through to the next. It's like a computer game, right? To the next level, and then suddenly you realize you're in a competition with lots of other people. And if the cynical side of me would say it's been set up for precisely that outcome. I don't think it always has, but that's where we end up. And it's the foibles of human decision making that means these theoretical models sometimes produce outcomes that we don't want.
It's something I've never bought into. So I absolutely understand somebody wanting to get paid what they deserve. So if they feel that they deserve a certain amount of money, having that conversation. The titles part I never have. And we're actually doing another version of this podcast, Should Managers Become Extinct? And it's really interesting. So the folk who want managers to become extinct, I expected them to come on to say, let's get rid of job titles. People should be creators. And if you are a creator who happens to be more senior in the organization, your job is to support and give autonomy to other people who are more junior to you, so they also become a creator and they can kind of mimic you and become their own as well at the same time. So learn from you while finding themselves. And none of them did. So they came in and said, well, we do still need to have the titles. And I'm thinking, well, if we're making managers extinct, I feel we need to be getting rid of the labels actually associated with it. And academia is terrible for this, kind of people wanting to be called doctor and professor when they're introduced, or PhD. And I don't understand if it's ego driven or just that they want to have some credibility that's associated with them before they ever do anything.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So I got to the title of managing director within banking, and it's not the top position, but it's a relatively senior position. And it was fascinating because I went through a whole process of, do I put this on my email footer or not? And at the time, it was prevalent for everybody to put their rank on the email footer, and I just went, that's of no consequence. We shouldn't be framing conversations based on, if I want to perform to the best of my ability, I need to speak to whoever knows whatever, and I don't want the conversation to be somehow coloured by that title. So I removed mine. I said I'll leave my functional title because that's relevant information, albeit that you could have worked out that I was a managing director from that functional title. But then I looked at things like the phone directory or the internal messaging system, and this job title stuff was everywhere. It was literally you couldn't get information about someone without being presented with what level they were at the organization. And so the conclusion I reached was that I needed that title to be able to make things happen, but I'd rather live in a world where that wasn't necessary. But for as long as it was, I would, it's sort of, you need it, but you don't want it. And it's a nice luxury to have, right? Because I can sit there and say, well, I don't think we should put titles on this, knowing that actually ultimately my title would be visible to people and it would help make things happen. But it's very, very strange. And, I find the title managing director strange because I was doing a reasonable amount of managing, not that much directing. And it didn't really, I didn't really bear any resemblance, but it felt like something that was necessary to be able to get things done. And the more I look at it, the more I think actually those things trap us. And also, by the way, some of the stuff that came with that was stuff I really didn't enjoy. I like going, there's a lot more nonsense that comes with those titles because they have to give you a whole load of things to go with it or have all these other things. And so, yeah, I'm with you completely. I think it's really worth asking the question, why do we have them and do we need them? And so what negative behavior is that? And I think when we look at titles, they're often perceived to be, it can only be a good thing because it's prestige and honor and marking things. I think, as we should do with all forms of, and it's a form of behavioral intervention, right? It exists for a purpose to ultimately to drive human behavior on some level, right? To make people aspire to it, give them authority. We should be saying to ourselves, what is the downside of these things? Because there are huge downsides to them. And let's examine and discuss those. And we never do because we sort of take it as a given. And I love the fact that you're challenging some of these things and saying, well, do we need it? But you're right. Even the radical people, we can't go that far because if we got rid of those, it'd be anarchy. I'm not necessarily sure it would, but I think it's worth debating.
Well, I think you'd have to continue to add value. And I think this is the problem with people who do get these status titles, is that there's good evidence actually that we add value up until the point of the threshold of the highest level that we're going to, that we're striving to get it. And then it falls away. So for me, there's a productivity argument for kind of somebody needs to show up and do a job to a certain level, regardless of what age they are. And if more experience allows you to do that more effectively, you should get the accolades. But I don't think we should repeatedly be giving you the accolades for something that you've done, five something years ago. If it was me, I would take back professor titles when people stop publishing and kind of check out and start playing golf or whatever it is the absent professors do in academic institutions. And ultimately that would make us much more productive.
I love that. I think that's really interesting. But no, and you phrase it in those. So I think if we were starting again and we were starting from the perspective of how do we get the best out of people, we wouldn't design the structures that we have nowadays. And so we have structures that are designed to lock people in. As we're talking about the Stockholm Syndrome, I think some of these structures are precisely designed to do that. And I come back to the computer game analogy. It's like, here's another layer. You've unlocked another secret level. Stick around to get that and get the baubles that go with that. And the even bigger office and the bigger title and the bigger paycheck and all those other things. And so we've designed these things for precisely the outcomes that actually we all say we don't want. Well, not all of us, but those of us that are questioning it say we don't want. And so I do think there's a point of sort of question, thinking, well, if we started again, how could we design? And it's a bit utopian, and it's not going to happen overnight. But I'd love to have these discussions.